Welcome to the Stoic Tide. Some men don't need enemies to destroy them. They do it themselves. One careless sentence at a time, not with fists, but with phrases that sound tough, confident, maybe even wise. But underneath, it's just fear wrapped in laziness. You've heard them before. Those lines that signal a man has stopped growing, stopped thinking, and started coasting. The Stoics warned us, "Sec is the mirror of the mind." And when your words are built on excuses and ego, your life quietly follows. In this video, we're not here to play nice. We're exposing 6 things stupid men say, the kinds of phrases that chip away at your discipline, your dignity, and your respect without you even realizing it. And more importantly, we'll show you what a Stoic man says instead. Because your language isn't just noise, it's a signal. Either it sharpens your soul or it sells it off piece by piece. If you've ever said something and immediately regretted the weakness behind it, this one's going to sting in the best way. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. I'd rather be quiet than sound like a fool. Now let's break the silence before your words do more damage than your enemies ever could. 1. That's just how I am. One of the most quietly dangerous things a man can say is, "That's just who I am." It sounds firm. It sounds definitive. But under the surface, it's pure surrender. Not surrender to truth or to principle, but to stagnation. This phrase is often spoken by men who've confused being unchanging with being strong. They don't grow. They don't question themselves. They just plant their feet in the same spot year after year, convinced that immobility equals integrity. It doesn't. It's just ego with a lazy mask on. I knew a man named Carl, retired Navy sharp dresser, 70 years old, the kind of guy who commanded a room without saying much. But the people closest to him knew better. He was stuck, emotionally frozen. Every time his wife asked for more connection, more vulnerability, Carl would mutter, "I'm not built like that." When his son tried to talk about past wounds, Carl dismissed it with, "That's not how I do things." Over time, his relationships began to quietly collapse, not from drama, but from dust. Nothing changed, nothing moved, and eventually nothing remained. When his wife left, she didn't slam the door. She just stopped waiting for a man who refused to evolve. That's what makes this phrase so destructive. It sounds like conviction, but it's a prison sentence wrapped in fake strength. Stoic philosophy rejects that kind of self-abandonment. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." And that wisdom hits harder the older you get because life doesn't stop shaping you unless you stop listening. And many men, especially in their later years, confuse experience with insight. But one can exist without the other. A man who keeps repeating the same excuse becomes nothing more than a statue of himself. Solid, unmoving, forgotten. A Stoic man doesn't hide behind identity. He refines it. He listens not because he's weak, but because he's wise enough to know that every day gives him another chance to sharpen what he is. Discipline doesn't mean staying the same. It means choosing progress over pride. The man who says, "That's just how I am," has not just stopped growing. He started decaying. And once that rot sets in, it seeps into everything. His words get shorter. His mind closes tighter. His life narrows into routine and resistance until one day all he's left with is a worn-out phrase and a long list of people who gave up waiting for him to change. The Stoic doesn't cling to identity like armor. He uses truth like a whetstone. He adjusts. He evolves, not because the world demands it, but because his own soul does. And if that first phrase didn't sting, the next one will. Let's talk about the man who confuses silence with strength and uses that lie to hide from everything real. 2. Real men don't talk about feelings. According to research from the American Psychological Association, men who suppress their emotions are at significantly higher risk for depression, cardiovascular disease, and even premature death. Yet despite this, one of the most damaging lies passed from man to man, especially in older generations, is the belief that real men don't talk about feelings. It's passed down like an heirloom worn like a badge of honor. But what it really is at its core is a shield built out of fear. Men who cling to this idea are not showcasing strength. They're avoiding the inner war they're too afraid to fight. This phrase isn't about masculinity. It's about hiding. It's the emotional equivalent of pulling the shades down and hoping the storm passes. But what it does instead is allow pain, confusion, and resentment to rot silently beneath the surface until it shows up as anger, addiction, or total disconnection. A man who believes he has to bury everything just to be respected doesn't understand that what he's really doing is burying himself alive. Stoicism is often misinterpreted here. People here control your emotions and assume it means deny them. But that's not Stoicism. That's avoidance. The Stoics never taught emotional suppression. They taught emotional clarity. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful rulers in human history, wrote privately about his deepest fears, his grief, his flaws. He didn't broadcast them. He faced them. He dissected them so they wouldn't rule him in silence. The Stoic man doesn't fear feeling. He fears being owned by feelings he never named. Emotional maturity doesn't mean you break down in public, nor does it mean you numb yourself into Stoic cosplay. It means you observe what's happening inside you quietly, ruthlessly, honestly, and learn to respond from stillness, not impulse. Men who refuse to talk about what they carry are often the ones carrying the most damage. They think that showing no cracks will protect them, when in reality it's the cracks that let the light of wisdom come through. To speak about what troubles you, not in weakness but in full command of your voice, is a strength very few possess. The truth is, the man who never speaks about his inner life is often the one most controlled by it. And if you can't admit the truth to yourself, someone else will end up living in the shadow of your silence. Stoicism doesn't ask for your silence. It asks for your honesty. You don't need to cry in front of strangers, but you do need to stop pretending you don't feel, because the next phrase, it's where blame starts to rot everything a man could have taken ownership of. And once that rot spreads, nothing noble survives. Let's talk about the man who dodges accountability by default every time with just 4 words. 3. It's not my fault. Few phrases reveal a man's inner weakness faster than "it's not my fault." On the surface, it sounds like a defense, but underneath it's an admission of defeat. This is the language of a man who surrendered all agency over his life, who believes the world just happens to him, that he is always the victim, never the cause, never the solution. And that mindset doesn't just erode his dignity, it sterilizes his entire existence. The Stoics saw this kind of thinking as the beginning of moral decay. Epictetus wrote, "It is not events that disturb us, but our opinions about them." What does that mean? That your circumstances are rarely the true enemy. It's your interpretation of them that grants them power. And no interpretation is more destructive than the belief that responsibility always belongs to someone else. The man who constantly blames the economy, his boss, his wife, his childhood, his ex, his enemies, or fate itself, is not explaining his pain. He's giving away his power, and worse, he becomes deaf to the one voice that could change everything, his own. Marcus Aurelius warned, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The man who refuses to accept that is not Stoic. He is shackled by excuses. Blame is easy. It's a reflex for those unwilling to reflect. But responsibility that requires structure, it demands you stop waiting for apologies. Stop hoping the conditions change and start asking one brutal question: what can I control? And the answer is always the same: your reaction, your direction, your discipline. Older men, especially those who've seen years of hardship, often carry deep scars, financial, emotional, spiritual. And yes, many of those wounds weren't self-inflicted. But carrying that pain into the future like it's a free pass to stagnate is not wisdom. It's cowardice with a long memory. The Stoic doesn't deny injustice, but he refuses to live in reaction to it. Seneca put it simply, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Life will rub you raw, but blaming the friction doesn't make you stronger. Enduring it with grace and adapting does. So the next time something falls apart and that phrase rises in your throat, catch it, hold it, replace it. Don't say "it's not my fault." Say "it's now my responsibility." Because that shift, that subtle moment of ownership, is the difference between a man who remains bitter and one who becomes better. And now we go deeper into that entitlement mindset, into a phrase so common it's practically cultural. It's the voice of mediocrity disguised as confidence. Let's talk about what happens when a man believes he deserves more without earning any of it. For "I deserve better," few words weak of quiet arrogance more than "I deserve better." It sounds like self-respect, but in reality, it's often a mask for resentment and laziness. Men who say it loudly are rarely the ones doing the quiet daily work of actually becoming better. They wait. They demand, they expect life or others to simply hand over something higher, cleaner, richer. But Stoicism dismantles this mindset from the ground up. It teaches that life owes you nothing. And dignity doesn't come from what you think you're entitled to. It comes from what you cultivate, regardless of the outcome. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Do not waste time wondering what a good man should be. Be one." That line cuts straight through entitlement. It doesn't ask what you've been denied. It asks what you're doing right now to align with virtue. The man who constantly says, "I deserve better," is usually doing less than he thinks and expecting more than he's earned. He's trading humility for hunger and craftsmanship for complaint. The Stoic doesn't walk through life with a list of what he's owed. He walks with discipline, with silence, with the willingness to do what's hard without asking the world to clap for him. Epictetus said, "First say to yourself what you would be and then do what you have to do." This is the opposite of entitlement. It's embodiment. Entitled men often confuse dissatisfaction with growth, but they're not the same. Dissatisfaction without discipline just leads to bitterness. True growth requires discomfort, responsibility, and restraint. Not once does the Stoic say, "I want what's mine." He says, "I will be what I admire regardless of what I receive." Men in later stages of life often feel this phrase creeping in when relationships falter, when careers plateau, when recognition fades. The temptation is to blame others for not seeing your worth. But here's the reality. If you spend more time announcing your value than developing it, you've already lost the thread. Seneca wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And one of the greatest wastes is the time spent demanding rewards for work never done." A man of depth, of substance, of Stoic character doesn't say, "I deserve better." He asks, "Am I still sharpening?" Because that question holds him accountable to the process, not the prize. And when a man falls too deeply into entitlement, what comes next is even worse. Retreat. Not to regroup, but to avoid. Let's move to the next phrase. The one that reveals a man who's given up on doing what's right because he's become too comfortable doing only what's his job. 5. That's not my job. I'm not doing that. It's not my job. You'll hear this phrase from men who've quietly stopped leading, but still want to be seen as reliable. It's a sentence that sounds like boundaries, but it's really avoidance dressed up as maturity. Men who live by this line shrink their presence until all that's left is obligation and routine. They confuse minimal effort with balance, and slowly they trade usefulness for comfort until their value becomes tied only to what's on a checklist and not an ounce more. I remember a man named Rye, an old machinist from Pittsburgh. He worked the line for 30 years, never missed a shift, showed up every day at 5 a.m. sharp. But at home he lived by the phrase, "Not my job." The dishes, not his job. Helping his teenage son with school decisions, not his job. Talking through anything emotional with his wife, definitely not his job. He provided, he worked, he paid bills, he did the bare minimum in all the places that required more, and called it being dependable. When his wife finally left after 28 years, he sat in the same kitchen chair he'd always occupied and said, "I did everything I was supposed to do." But that's just it. He never asked what needed to be done, only what was assigned to him. And that's not leadership, that's silent retreat. The Stoics never lived by duty alone. They lived by purpose. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What is your vocation? To be a good man. Not a man who hides behind job descriptions, but one who sees a gap and fills it." Stoic strength means showing up even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's unseen, even when no one's keeping score. Because the man who only does what's his job is quietly hoping someone else will carry the weight of what he avoids. When a man repeatedly says, "It's not my job," what he's really saying is, "I don't want to be inconvenienced by responsibility." He's not protecting himself. He's forfeiting his influence. The Stoic man understands that power isn't found in what you avoid. It's found in what you embrace without being asked. And once you start outsourcing your effort, your value follows close behind. You're no longer someone others can lean on. You're someone they learn to work around. Next, we turn to a phrase even more dangerous. Not because it limits your actions, but because it numbs your spirit. It's the phrase that sounds harmless, even Zen-like, but it rots ambition from the inside out. Let's talk about the man who surrenders to apathy with a shrug and 5 deadly words. 6. It is what it is. According to behavioral science research, one of the first signs of learned helplessness in adults is verbal resignation. The moment people stop believing their actions can influence their reality, and no phrase signals that resignation more than the casual shrug of "it is what it is." At first it sounds stoic, detached, wise, but beneath the surface it's anything but. For many men, especially those worn down by years of disappointment, this phrase becomes a quiet death sentence. It's not acceptance, it's emotional surrender. The Stoics did teach us to accept what we cannot control, but they never asked us to forfeit agency over what we can. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That's a call to action, not a license to shut down. When a man constantly leans on it is what it is, he's no longer practicing stoic endurance. He's practicing emotional numbness. Seneca sharpened the message further. It is not that we are given a short life, but we make it short by wasting it. And the man who uses this phrase repeatedly is wasting more than time. He's wasting conviction. He's numbing his sense of purpose and disguising it as philosophical maturity. The deeper tragedy is that this mindset spreads quietly. It leaks into relationships, into ambition, into health. A man who stops fighting for what matters, who stops choosing his responses, becomes someone who watches his life like a stranger, passive, detached, and increasingly invisible. There's a difference between composure and capitulation. Stoic composure says, I see this for what it is and I will act accordingly within my power. Capitulation says, I see this and I give up. One sharpens you, the other sedates you. A Stoic doesn't mutter, it is what it is. When life gets hard, he examines. He accepts and then he responds, not with whining or rage, but with precision. Life will hurt. People will fail you. The world will not bend to your desires. But that's not permission to rot in passivity. So the next time this phrase rises in your chest, pause. Ask, is this real Stoic acceptance? Or am I just too tired to care? Because every time you choose passivity, you become easier to ignore. And one day you wake up not respected, not feared, not loved, but simply unnoticed. And that's the cruelest fate for any man who was once capable of more. Now let's close with clarity, because once you know these 6 phrases are eating away at your power, the only question left is, what will you say instead? Every man leaves a trail, sometimes in footsteps, sometimes in phrases. The truth is, most people won't judge you by your plans or even your past. They'll judge you by what slips out when you're not performing. And these 6 phrases, they don't just sound weak. They are weakness distilled into words. Repeated long enough, they become your identity. But here's the twist. That identity isn't final. Not if you have the guts to face it. Because weakness isn't the enemy. Denial is. Marcus Aurelius said, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. So if you speak like a victim, expect to suffer like one. But if you begin to speak with clarity, even in private, even when no one's listening, you start to rebuild something far stronger than reputation. Character. A Stoic man doesn't talk to impress. He speaks with precision, with restraint, with awareness. And when he's quiet, that silence carries weight. If this video hit a nerve, let it. That's where the growth starts. Like this video, subscribe to the Stoic Tide and drop a comment. I choose strength over sound because foolish men fill the air.